Hello and welcome to It's About You, the show that talks about things that matter to youth. I'm Fanashe. Now, it's been 3 weeks since the election. We've gotten a Prime Minister and also a list of Cabinet Ministers. This is the first time for Malaysia forming a coalition government where we see representative across parties cooperating, forming an alliance to be in this coalition government. So with all these new developments, we would like to hear youth's thought on the formation of this government and more importantly, what they aspire from them. We have with us here Adnan Yunus from Architects of Diversity, as well as Zhen Ting from YPolitics. Thank you so much for joining us today, you guys.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, before we get into the formation of the government, let's rewind a little bit on how we got here. So, the election saw about 73% of voter turnout. This time around, we have Undi 18 as well as automatic voter registration contributing to that number. Now, the Undi 18 group actually estimated that about 75% of first-time voters actually came out this time around, just based off the Johor state election held earlier. So, in your opinion, you think, both of you guys, how big was, also, counting in the election result as well, how big was the youth's impact this G15? And were they really the kingmakers, just like they were touted to be, Zhen Ting?
Oh yeah, so in terms of being kingmakers or not, I wouldn't say an absolute yes, but also not an absolute no, as always. Because as you mentioned, after Undi 18, we actually added to the voters population by around 1.7, 1.8 million. But then if you look at AVR, the automatic voters registration, right, it actually added a larger number by around, I think 4.7, 4.9% million voters. So so if you look at this absolute number by itself, I wouldn't say that Undi 18, after Undi 18, youth voters have substantially changed the voters population. But then it also depends a lot on individual constituencies, because if you look at the numbers of certain constituencies, based on some research from different researchers, in some constituencies with very low majority vote counts, for example, in some areas, especially I think in Sabah or even Pahang, Perak, in these places, youth are more significant in the sense that they will need a lower number to overturn the result from GE40, for example. Yeah, but then but in some constituencies, especially those in the urban areas like Klang Valley's, you see that because the majority votes is actually way larger than the other constituencies, right? So in that sense, youth voters are less significant in the sense that they need more votes to actually overturn the result. But then all in all, this doesn't mean that youth is not significant at all in determining the latest result. Because if you look at the Salaran level data, basically in each voting station, polling station, we have different channels, right?
Yeah.
So the later the channel is, the younger the voters are. Yeah. Although we don't have all the Salaran level data for all the polling stations, but based on what we can, for example, Dr. Ng Kian Ming actually just released his own research on the data he has. So you can see that there's actually quite an apparent divergence of voting preference based on the Salaran. It's quite interesting. You can see for example, PN, you can see more PN supporters in the later channels, in the later Salaran.
What about you, Anna? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think in a large sense, youths were extremely influential this time around. When we look at aspects like political discourse and voter education on social media, just been immense content creation on that end. And so I think youths as a force have kind of encouraged one another, and not just encourage one another, but even encourage people, new voters from other demographics, to just go out there and vote, which I think has been pivotal in why we have 73% voter turnout. Also, if you were to look at how political parties strategized in fielding candidates, whether it be Adam Adli, whether it be Yang Shfura Uthman, or even Syahril Hamdan, right? All of these are youth candidates, and so there were far more youth candidates fielded this time around as compared to previous elections. So I think it really goes to show how influential youths were. But to say that they were kingmakers, again, I think it's like what Zhen Ting said, a bit of a yes and a no. I think because at the end, we had a hung parliament. So obviously youths, I think they didn't really get the intended results as to how influential they wanted their vote to be.
It's still very sporadic for us to get a hung parliament, right? Now, talking about the election result here, like you said just now, the makings of an informed voter. So do you think the youths are actually aware of who or what they're voting into? So for example, from the electoral process to forming a government. I've actually seen a video last time where they weren't even sure what the ink was supposed to be. So, that sort of things. So do you think they have enough awareness this time around or information on the voting process and also, forming the government, per se?
Oh yeah, so like I echo a lot with you on like some people don't even know what the ink is for because
Yeah.
I actually registered as a pacha myself, so I had the chance to sit in the polling station and
that's nice.
Yeah, and the station I'm in, they're still considered youth, I guess. It's like from the 80s to the 70s. Yeah, there are a lot of these cases actually. Like they thought like the ink, actually this one, the ink we are actually using is to like vote for that instead of like jostling across. And there are a lot of cases like they will suddenly just shout out when they are voting, right? They will just ask like, oh, do I draw a cross or do I draw a tick, something? So they're still happening, and it's not only among you. The thing is.
Okay.
So I think that no matter, of course, like there are a lot of information online by every party to educate people on how you vote on the whole process itself. But then like, of course, this doesn't perfectly translate into like a higher awareness among young people, and also I cannot like say it for all of the young people, of course. Definitely, I think they are more aware than previously because like when G15 happening, there are a lot of campaignings, there are a lot of different NGOs. For example, the NGO I'm in, YPolitics, we're also doing a lot of education and infographics online to educate young people on how to cast their vote, on just being like just feeding them with more information that we can. But I wouldn't say like all of the young voters are totally aware of the candidates or the parties.
So, okay, leading up to the election as well, we actually see a lot of, like you said, campaign material flooding in. Unfortunately, some are true and some are not, right? Not just by parties itself, but also from their supporters as well. Do you think, this sort of campaign material or flooding of information on the G15, how much of this actually impacted youth's decision to go vote and as well as who they vote, Adnan?
Yeah, so I think, so I'll break it down in terms of deciding to go vote and deciding who to vote for. As far as deciding to just go and vote, I think it's been all the information out there, especially on social media and throughout the campaign trail, has been pivotal in getting youths to vote. I think after what happened 2 years ago with the whole Langkah Syaratan, a lot of youths have been kind of disheartened, and there's this general sentiment that even if I go out and vote, what difference would it actually make? But I think all the content out there, whether it talks about gerrymandering, malapportionment, right, just even basic info as to how many parliamentary seats there are, how do you form a government, and like you mentioned, how do you even form coalitions? All of this, I think, got youths in the mood to kind of go out there and vote. Because if you think about it, it's called Pilihan Raya. It is a kind of a festivity in a way, right? And so I think it really rallied youths to go out there and perform their civic duty. But I would say that in terms of deciding who to vote for, most often than not, and this is across all demographics, whether you're a youth or whether you're in your 60s or whatever, the decision as to who to vote for is actually made even before campaign period starts, right? You kind of already decide.
Some people listen to their mothers, for example, right?
Yeah.
What their parents vote for.
Exactly, right? So you're kind of already decide who to go vote for. But perhaps this time around, especially where the youth demographic is concerned, I think maybe there were quite a sizable number of youths who were undecided voters. And so for them, obviously, it would have been easier to be swayed by information or content put out there, whether it be on TikTok or Twitter, across Facebook.
All right. Obviously, it's unfortunate that we can't stray away from race and religious politics even now. And we see it being played even after elections, even throughout these 3 weeks after the election. We have seen politicians as well as their supporters from both sides of the divide, taunting each other with negative remarks, for example, using racial and religious propaganda. We have threats of May 13, for example, which is really bad. So what's your thoughts on this? How damaging can this be for politics in Malaysia and as well as community at large? And do you think youth, they are easily swayed by this sort of racial and religious propaganda, Adnan?
Yeah. So interestingly, when I think about race and religion and the use of it to garner votes, I think that the reason why it's always been a point of discussion in Malaysian politics is because the unfortunate truth is that race and religion sells. And so throughout the 2 weeks of campaigning, I had the privilege of being part of this program called Kami Nampak, which is to essentially track the use of race and religion on a candidate's social media profile. And just across 2 weeks and across the entire political spectrum, there were a total of approximately 348 offences. This really goes to show that
they really use the race and religious card.
Exactly, and it's just dominated, elections and Malaysian politics for the longest time. And I guess it's damaging because a lot of them are untrue, and a lot of them is basically just based on plain rhetoric and a lot of fear mongering. And I think the eventual harms is that we kind of then just retreat into our own social bubbles, and we mingle with people and discuss politics with people who we know will agree with us. And I think that's really harmful in the long run to the narrative of nation building, because if we just retreat to our own social bubbles, then we don't really kind of connect with each other. Exactly, and we don't really solve problems together, which require bipartisan effort. So,
what about you, Zhen? What's your thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah, I agree with Adnan. It's definitely worrying, especially if you look at videos about like May 30 incident, right? And if we don't do anything to actually stop this or to curb this, it will actually be more damaging in the future, because imagine if you say something bad about the other community or the other group, the other community will actually use that to add to the reason that why the other community is bad. So you can see people are getting more divergent in terms of opinions, or even they are just filled with false information and data on that. So yeah, it's definitely worrying. And it's also part of the reason, but I think to look at it from a bigger scale, the reason behind this is actually the lack of proper education in the syllabus. So for example, why young people will be so easily swayed by false information on May 13th, for example, is because we don't actually teach it. Yeah, exactly. So that's the only place, like TikTok and other social media, is the only place for them to get this information.
And
so
it's not entirely true sometimes.
Yes, exactly. But I wouldn't put 100% of blame on them, because this is not their fault. This is the only channel of information that they can get online.
All right, okay, we've talked about the election process and the outcome of it. After this, we'll talk more about the formation of this coalition government. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to It's About You. We have with us Adnan Yunus from Architects of Diversity and Zhen Ting from YPolitics. We've talked just now about the election process in general. Now we looked at the formation of the government. Now, this time around we have a coalition government, the first of its kind here in Malaysia. Just based off what we've seen in the past, since 2018, we've seen multiple governments, 4 prime ministers, a lot of cabinet reshuffles. So what do you make of this arrangement? What are your thoughts on this particular arrangement, and what challenges do you foresee? Zhen Ting, you can go first.
I think the first challenge for young people is to basically have a basic understanding of what's really going on right now. Because as you say, this is actually the first time we are having a hung parliament.
Yeah.
And you can see after the election result, when we didn't know what's going to take place, there are a lot of misunderstanding, or just they just have no idea on our system actually. You can see a lot of narrative PH actually won this election, so they should be a government. But we are in the Westminster system, right? So as long as you don't have a majority, you are not the government. So it actually makes sense, I would say. It's not wrong for them to form a coalition parliament or hung parliament. It's just that it's something that we haven't seen before.
We haven't seen it before.
Exactly.
Do you see any challenges in this particular government, especially when it comes to?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of challenges for them. First of all, to keep themselves stable, politically stability, because I think 2 things. The first one is what we discussed just now, the polarizing ideas and opinions among people, how they can, with this first like they used to be enemies, now they are friends.
Yeah.
With this government, how can they like, persuade people? How can
A
they
lot of
tackle
public
this issue?
perception comes into
Yeah,
play.
I think the main thing they need to tackle is basically to come to build a new narrative
Yeah.
to stop this like distorting
Yeah.
image.
What about you, Adnan?
Yeah, so I mean, I have my mixed feelings about this current unity government.
Are they
especially with
good or are they bad?
So it's a bit of both. I think they, at the end of the day, whatever it is, they should be defined by their principles. So I think when they say things like taking a 20% pay cut, I think that's commendable. It's the bare minimum they can do. So I don't think we should kind of celebrate it. But I mean, whatever little wins we can take. But also I think certain things that I am apprehensive about is, for example, the lack of representation within the cabinet. Again,
Yeah.
it can go both ways. I mean, just because you have a lack of representation does not mean that we will not have cabinet ministers who champion inclusive policies. So I guess that will take some time. But as far as their challenges go, I think in terms of like breaking it down, I think the most immediate challenge will be the vote of confidence on 19 December, if I'm not mistaken. So, I think this time around, especially because it's still predominantly a PH-led government, right? They have to prove their stability. Because if they, if things go wrong and if they mess up again, then it'll be very hard to get the confidence of the voters. So I think in their immediate challenge is that. As far as the short term goes, it's the economy. Now I understand that with a lot of economic problems, a lot of the challenges can only be tackled perhaps in the long term. But I think that because the last 2 years the rakyat have really suffered a lot, and so I think we can trust that the rakyat will be watching them, and that will be their challenge, getting long-term efforts done within this short period of time. And also I think perhaps the longer term would be kind of fending off the polarization that Malaysia has had. I mean, this is something that we've had for 60 years now. It'll be really, really tough for them, and I think that will probably be their biggest challenge moving forward. So yeah, a lot to be wary about, but also a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, we don't want another another election soon.
Yeah.
Now, the cabinet ministers, they've already announced the list of cabinet ministers. They've already clocked in for the first day. Any notable names that you feel resonates with you, as well as what is your expectation from this minister during their tenure? Adnan, you can go first.
Yeah, so I think 3 ministers for me stand out. One is Fadlina Siddiq, Ministry of Education. She will have, she's had no prior known experience in the education field, so it'll be interesting to see how she approaches these issues. But I think along the things that she has to kind of work through is, one, streamlining the school calendars again, because due to COVID it's kind of ran off, right? And students are taking the brunt of it. So I think that's the first thing. Also, secondly, I think that she needs to kind of incentivize TVET education, because a lot of students want to specialize in specific areas, in specific technicalities, but they're not able to, and the current education system does not facilitate as easily as it should be. So I think that's something she has to tackle. And of course, very notably, and I think this probably has gone a bit unnoticed, but to me, I think discrimination in education is very important.
Yeah.
With our previous engagements with the Education Ministry and with education executives, the sentiment is always that, yes, discrimination in education is a problem, but there's also more pressing issues to deal with now.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with that, right? Because discrimination in education is an urgent matter that needs to be addressed now. So definitely, I think in her portfolio, that's what she has to look at. Also, I think, probably Nik Nazmi in the Ministry of Environment, Natural Resources and Climate
Definitely
Change.
something that is pressing as well.
Yes, because as far as Malaysia's climate strategies have gone, it very much focuses on mitigation but not so much on prevention. So I think questions that we need to ponder upon our infrastructures more resilient due to climate changes. And thirdly, I think definitely would be Rafizi Ramli in the Ministry of Education. I think kind of
It's definitely the hot
streamlining
person to look at.
Yeah, exactly. I think streamlining the country back to economic recovery. So yeah, again, just a lot of challenges before them. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt, but also not the benefit of our silence.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. What about you? Any notable ministers?
I think another minister and ministry that caught my attention is the rebranded Ministry of Law and Institutional Reforms, led by Azarina. So so you can see that Anwar Ibrahim is actually kind of like, by doing this, he's setting his priority in institutional reforms, which is definitely really important and necessary for long-term benefits. But of course, like we will see what they will do. So far, she has promised granting citizenship to mothers born out of Malaysia, to the children of them. And so yeah, there are a lot of, I mean, like, you can, promises are promises and actions are actions. So this feel like, I definitely have hopes, and you can in what they committed, but yeah, we'll see what they actually do.
She has mentioned separation of AG as her first task, so we'll keep her on to that, hopefully.
We'll keep them accountable.
All right, now let's look at some of the real challenges facing youth, especially for today. You know, we have an array of them: unemployment, education. You know, you've mentioned some of them as well. What do you think would be the first thing that you would like this new government to tackle? Pressing matters for youth, you feel? Ting?
Yeah, I think I mentioned just now. First off, in education, there really needs to be a syllabus reform in like, especially in history and civic education, to prevent this, what we see right now, the polarization, from happening in the future. So that's the first thing I actually hope we can do something in education. And secondly, on like unemployment, as you mentioned, although our numbers are actually looking good right now because of the lower base effect from last year. But as everyone is talking about these days, we are, the whole world is stepping into a global recession next year. And so I think the government also needs to prepare themselves, so like we can, especially for the young people who just got out of university, to have a soft landing on this potential recession that we are seeing in the next year.
What about you, Adnan? Pressing matters for youth.
So I think that as far as youth unemployment goes, I wouldn't say that unemployment is a very, very urgent matter. I think probably the bigger issue is actually underemployment. So where, you know, a lot of youths, especially from who have undertaken professional degrees, right, whether it be medicine, law, engineering, right, a lot of them, upon graduating, find it really tough to get a job, and even if they do, it's, you know, the pay is about like 2.5. It's not exactly the most decent and livable wages, and, you know, so therefore they have to resort to a lot of part-time and, you know, side hustles, right? You know, becoming a Grab rider, you know, making burgers or whatever you can think of, right? And whatever freelancing that they can do. So I think that we really have to tackle underemployment. I think what the government has to do is that there has to be some form of stimulus to be able, or, you know, subsidies provided to certain necessary companies to be able to, you know, give youths better wages to kind of, you know, face that, to kind of pay for their cost of living.
But, you know, I like to tackle a little bit on cost of living, because you mentioned just now, you know, cost of living issues affect not just youth, but, you know, everyone. And like you said just now, you know, there's a potential threat of recession next year. So let's tackle, you know, the main cause here. So what do you think what would you like to see when it comes to tackling problems of cost of living, Adnan?
So I think that we kind of need to reimagine how we kind of solve issues related to the youth's cost of living. A lot of our strategies or policies in the past have always just been to help youths, but I think that these strategies have to expand towards helping youths to help themselves, right? How do we help youths help themselves? So there has to be more more self-sustaining system. So not just, you know, the most conventional approaches has been just one-off handouts, like one-to-one, this one-to-one, that 200, 500. But that doesn't really tackle the problem, you know, at the roots,
Can't get
right?
much from 200 to 250 these days.
Right. It's probably food for like a week or two max, depending where you eat. But so I think that, you know, we have to start talking about, you know, scholarship provisions, right? Can we increase the base, and who we give scholarships to? Are enough scholarships available to B40 communities? So these are questions that we need to think about. Also, besides that, you know, are there investment into entrepreneurial schemes to be able to help youths become more enterprising, right? So I think that by equipping youths with these necessary skills, I think that's how they are able to then stand on their 2 feet, as opposed to always having to depend on an external third party to be able to fund them.
Okay. We have one last question, if you can keep it brief. You know, as we've seen from the recent election, you know, we talked about race, religion, and you also talk about, you know, having an inclusive policy here. What hopes do you have for the government, especially when it comes to policy making, right, to bridge this gap when it comes to race, religion, as well as, you know, going at equality from all divides, right, to ensure that policies remain inclusive for all? Ting can go first.
Yeah. So definitely the first hope I have is really to drive back the narrative, the discussion to policy-based discussion instead of what we talk about just now, like they are driven by racial, like racial and even religious issues, because it's actually happening right now, and it's very real. So the government will need to let people know it's actually the policies that matter, but not what we say, religions or even races. So this is like my main hope.
What about you, Adnan?
Yeah, I mean, so being in the line of and working with an NGO that focuses on race and religion, I hope that, well, I don't say I want to be out of a job, but you know, I hope that one day we won't have to consciously fight issues of race and religion. We won't have to consciously fight discrimination. I hope that our systems will be naturally inclusive, where, you know, principles associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion will be a natural practice in our country. So, and I think it's time for us to move past the ideology of race and religion. Let's start focusing, I think, like Zhen said, let's start focusing on issues that matter. I mean,
like need-based policies.
Exactly,
right?
and you don't have to have, you can believe in a different religion or whatnot, or be of a different race and still agree that the economy needs revival, right? So I think let's start focusing on what's really important here.
Yeah, and it's something that, you know, we stand for. We live in a multicultural society,
Right, exactly.
and we hope to live, you know, in Malaysia that is harmonious across all race and divides. So there you have it, Adnan Yunus from Architects of Diversity, as well as Ting from YPolitics, talking about what they aspire from this new government. I'm Fanashi. Thank you for watching.